Hi everyone, I'm Lorenzo. I'm happy to be here to share some of the work that we did over the summer with several colleagues at KU Leuven and with the Belgian Football Association. So I'm Italian, as you can guess, and I love soccer, of course. And this summer was not a very easy one for Italian soccer fans. So in June, I traveled with fellow author Luca to several matches of the Italian national team in Germany, which were then described as awful, embarrassing, and several other things that I agree with. So as I was coming home, we were trying to take some positives out of the experience. The first positive was actually that Belgium did not do a lot better than Italy, so that prevented a lot of fun jokes from my Belgian colleagues. And then we also, there were several goals scored at the Euros that caught our eye and got us thinking and discuss. And I'm going to share two with you. So the first one, and again, this is a pure coincidence, but it's a goal that Belgium conceded against Slovakia. If you notice, there is a throw-in for Belgium, close to Belgium's own goal, and then here Doku tries to play the ball, makes a very bad choice, and then Belgium loses the ball, and Slovakia can quite easily score from the box. And in the second one, we have a similar pattern. The second one is, nonetheless, then the fastest goal in the history of the Euros, which Albania scored against Italy. So Albania kick a long ball as soon as the match starts, and then Italy has a throw-in, again in its defensive area. And then here Di Marco completely messes up and basically assists Bayrami for an easy goal and makes the Westfalen Stadion explode with the joy of 70,000 Albanian fans, plus myself and my friend. So when we discussed, when we were heading home, we thought, well, but is it really necessary to always retain possession and keep the ball even in defense? Wouldn't it be nice to sometimes going back to kick it out from the defense to minimizing risks? And at this point, we also see that in these two cases, that even if we concede a throw-in from the opponents, but we are close to the opponent's goal, and if we press in a kind of an organized manner, then it might even be easier to score than from building up from the back in some specific scenarios, of course. So really, the idea that we wanted to consider is to study whether, as an alternative and safer option to longer risky possession chains at the back, whether it might be worth to directly kick a long ball out of bounds and then aggressively press the throw-in from the opponents, which is kind of in contrast with the general trend in modern soccer, let's say. And the underlying belief is here that it might actually be easier to score having recovered the ball from the back than through a diligent build-up from close to our own goal. Or at least that's what we want to study. To make it more concrete, what we did was study the trade-off between a backward pass and this, what I mentioned, so a long kick out of bounds that generates a throw-in from the opponents that we then want to press. And so really this idea involves the contrast between the paradigm of always retaining the ball and the paradigm of sacrificing the possession in exchange for a positional advantage up the pitch. And we did this with a twofold approach. So in the first case, we simply extracted from historical data how easy and likely it is to score a goal in the immediate future of a backward pass and of a throw-in. And then we proceeded to build a simple but machine learning-based framework that is able to simulate the two alternatives, assign a value to the two alternatives by means of machine learning model, and compare to ultimately evaluate what would be better in a specific scenario. So really this first part is extremely simple. It just provides additional motivation and concrete numbers to what I just said, if you're not convinced by the videos. And what we did was we took a lot of matches and then we counted how often a team scored in the immediate future, which is defined as the next 10 actions, of a backward pass and of a throw-in by the opponents. So if you look at some numbers, here there are a lot of numbers, but you should actually focus on the circles that are circled in red. So the first three show the frequency with which a team in build-up is able to score a goal from those three areas of the pitch. So for example, for the bin that is right outside of the box, a team that plays a backward pass from there scores 0.2% of the time in the next 10 actions. And actually, if you look at the last blue bin, that represents the probability with which a team scores after the opponents take a throw-in from there. So from close to the opponent's goal, so basically from where Di Marco took the throw-in in the second video. And that probability, that number is actually slightly higher than what I was mentioning earlier. So this number also confirmed to us that there is some support given by evidence to the fact that maybe when you are in a build-up phase, putting a long ball out close to the opponent's goal could actually be a viable strategy, and that worked for Albania, for example. And so at this point, we chose to develop a framework that allows us to study more in detail this, starting from a defined game situation. So really the idea is to take a snapshot, which is really what we have with Statsbomb 360 data, and then consider two alternatives, a backward pass and a long ball out of bounds. And we want to, first of all, dispose of these concrete alternatives and then evaluate them, give a value to both of them to see which one should be done and is preferable. So the first issue is that when we study these kind of situations, in practice, only one of the two alternatives happened. And the choice that we made was to compare observed passes with simulated clearances for two main reasons. First of all, there are way more passes than clearances, so it was easier to gather a lot of data to use for this study. And when we look only at historical clearances, it's also pretty difficult to define when a clearance was done on purpose, on where it was, or whether it was really just out of necessity because a player was being pressed and wanted to give away the ball. So what we do, again, we start from a snapshot that is right before an observed backward pass, and then we simulate the alternative scenario with the features that you read there. So the clearance has a specific length that defines the start location of the upcoming throw-in. There is a time that the team takes to take the throw-in, so to put the ball back in play, the throw-in end location, and then we add an indication of whether the team that has given away the ball is actively trying to pressure the throw-in from the opponents. And we assume that this last feature is always set to true, because the alternative scenario that we are trying to study here is we give away the ball, but we move up the pitch and press the throw-in. For the rest, we used a very simple simulation approach where we sample realistic values for these other features from training data distributions. For example, here you see the time of throw-in that is typically between 5 and 15 seconds, something like that. So at this point in our framework, we have the starting snapshot of the game that we want to, where we want to choose which option is best. And we have two concrete options, an observed pass that we have from the data that we receive, and then a simulated clearance that puts the ball out as close as possible, ideally to the opponent's goal. And now the question is, how do we assign a value to both of these actions? We followed an approach that is pretty common in literature. So we describe the game state with a set of handcrafted features, and then use an XGBoost model to assign a value based on these features that describe the game state. So we have two specific feature sets that are action specific. So some of the features are always used, some features are only used for passes, and some are only used for throw-ins. And we have, in general, we have three types of features. We have contextual features, such as goal difference in the current moment of the game, the elapsed time of the game, and the time since the previous action. Then we have on-ball information, so what we typically extract from event stream data, such as the start and end location of the event, the body part by which the pass was executed in the case of a pass, and the result of the action. And then we have additional features that are extracted from 360 data and allow to give more context to the game state that we are studying. So for example, when we are dealing with a pass, we can calculate from the 360 data the number of outplayed players or how easy it is to intercept the ball for the chosen pass. Or in the case of a throw-in, what I mentioned earlier, we can define whether the team that is defending the throw-in is actively applying pressure on the throw-in itself. And then an XGBoost model, we train an XGBoost model with these features, and the models assign a value to the game state that we see here, for example, as the probability of scoring minus the probability of conceding in the next 10 actions. So basically the framework is done. So we start from a snapshot. We have the two options concretely in front of our eyes. We have a model, an XGBoost model that is able to assign a value to each of the two. We get the value, and we are able to compare the two. It's pretty simple, but we can do some cool stuff with this. The most immediate application that we can use is taking a single match, execute some analysis on the match, and ultimately highlight a few match situations from the game where actually, according to our framework, it would have been better to kick a long ball out, and instead the team passed the ball backward. You just need to extract all the passes, use the framework starting from the snapshot of those passes, and you are able to extract something like this. So, for example, in the first one on your left, You see that here the player passed the ball backwards, but it's a blue player that you almost cannot see because he's heavily pressed by 3 opponents. And so according to the framework, in this case, this backward pass is quite risky, and it would have been better to just put the ball out and close to the goal of the opponents. But then we did something more, and we exploited this to extract some more general conclusions about the study of this trade-off. So intuitively, what you would think, or at least what we were thinking, was that the place of the pitch in which this booting away the ball option is more useful is when you are in the defense, because in the defense, in your defensive third, you risk of losing the ball, and instead, if you put the ball away, you gain advantage on the pitch, and it might also be more convenient to then press and score from there. So to study this in the defensive third, what we did was we took the 10 best teams in last year's Serie A, and then we aggregated the values that our framework gave to all the observed passes that these teams made in their defensive third. And of course, the same thing for the simulated clearances in the defensive third, from the defensive third. And so the first thing that you should notice here is that all these values are positive, and we are subtracting from the value of the clearances, the value of the passes, which means that for all the teams, when we look at the aggregation over a season, if the team always kicked the ball long, according to our framework, this would have generated more value than if the team always passed the ball backwards, as it did in practice. And the number, actually, the number is something like 1, so we can interpret this as sort of 1 more expected goal in a season, which is not a huge amount, but of course here we are considering moments of build-up, so we cannot expect to make a 5 expected goal difference or this kind of stuff. But it really, I think it shows that in the defensive third, even when we look at this by means of our numbers, it makes sense, it still makes sense to kick the ball long. And then to check that all of this works well, we wanted to verify, well, but at some point this has to stop, because it doesn't make sense anymore to do this, to follow this approach when we get closer to the goal. At that point, we are already in a good position, and it doesn't really make sense to sacrifice the possession, right? And that's indeed the case. So if we repeat this analysis on the full pitch, here we divided the pitch in 6 bins, and we did the same exact experiment as before, but just there is only one number because it's the average between the teams in Serie A. And what you see is that the blue bins here are all those that are beyond midfield. So that tells us basically that when we go beyond midfield, this strategy doesn't have sense anymore, and it's better to just keep the possession. Even if you play the ball backwards, you are still in a good position to then have an impact with your build-up game. But as you see again, in the defensive half, we can make a point in favor of booting the ball long. So just a few more specifications. It's important, like I'm always talking about kicking the ball long, but this needs to be followed by applying a pressure on the throw-in. Otherwise, you're really just giving away the ball. And so in the previous experiment, we always assumed that the team can apply pressure on the throw-in, but actually that might be a little bit of an excessive assumption because, for example, the other team might be very quick in putting the ball back in play, or because it's the 90th minute and you are tired and you're not able to press. So we compare this just to have an idea of what happens with other 2 scenarios where a team is only able to press half of the time or 3 times out of 4. And basically this gave some quite reasonable results. So if you are able to press less, there will be less value from kicking away the ball, of course, because in a lot of these cases you will just be giving away the possession. But this remains the best option. The long kick remains the best option in the defensive third, even if you're not able to always press. Whereas in the middle third, if you are tired, maybe at that point it's better to retain possession, according to this study. And finally, a note. So far, I've only talked about passing the ball or booting the ball, but the analysis made over a season was always assuming that the team kept doing one of the 2 things. Of course, that's a bit too much, so it was very useful to study the trade-off between the 2 options, but then in practice, you might want to sometimes pass the ball and sometimes boot it long, because intuitively it's easy to think at cases where one is better and some other cases when the other one is better. So we can easily improve over these 2 trivial policies of always booting the ball or always passing the ball by learning a mixed policy that chooses what should be done. So what we did was we further learned an XGBoost policy that predicts which of the 2 options will be better rated by our models. And this policy achieved, even if it's a pretty simple tree ensemble, it achieves more than 80% accuracy, so it's able to learn when it's better to do one thing and when it's better to do the other thing. And it always improves over the naive policies of always passing the ball and always booting the ball. And I'm sure this can also be improved. In the middle third, you see that the total possession value over a season is increased by basically 2 goals. So that's not a negligible amount, I would say. And that's it. So to wrap up, we investigated this trade-off between keeping the ball, retaining the ball by means of a backward pass, and then instead executing a long clearance out of bounds, followed by a pressure on the opponents. The first part, where we just did some counting by means of historical data, showed that it actually might even be easier or of the same difficulty to recover the ball and score from a throw-in towards the end of the pitch than from diligent build-up from the back. And then I showed the machine learning framework that we created that allows to start from a snapshot, consider the 2 options, and make some fun analysis about this trade-off, showing, for example, that booting the ball away is a valid option, especially when the ball is in the defensive half. And again, of course, this works better if we are able to aggressively press after we kick the ball long. Plus, we can learn policies that optimally combine these 2 options to really understand when it's better to do one thing and when it's better to do the other thing. Just a mention of a limitation. So the clear limitation of this work is that there are way more passes with respect to throw-ins, with respect to long clearances that originate throw-ins. So we solved this partially by choosing to simulate the clearances, because it's a pretty easy simulation to do. But this, of course, limits the contextual information at disposal of our throw-in value model, because when we value the throw-in, given that we are simulating the clearance, for example, we cannot use the 360 data because we don't know where the players will be at the time of the throw-in. So an alternative approach would probably be able to improve the throw-in value model, but still I think it was fun to do this analysis. I think it provided some interesting insights. I hope it was pleasant to listen to. These are all the authors, so it's me, Luca, Maike, Peter, and Jesse from KU Leuven, and Max and Maxime from the RBFA. So thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Lorenzo. It was pleasant to listen to. I have a question. I wonder if you did any sensitivity analysis on like the number of actions the goal has to be scored within. So I think you used 10 actions as like the target, but I wonder how sensitive it is to like increasing that to 20 actions, 30 actions, or whatever.
Yes. So I think that definitely can have an impact. So actually, when we started working on this, I was planning to use a different kind of window and just using a possession-based window, so keeping track of everything that happens until the team loses the possession of the ball. But that didn't really change a lot. I would have expected that would have changed more. That didn't change a lot. So then because we usually work with VAPE and this 10-action window, then we chose to retain with that approach. But yes, that's something that we tried.
Okay, cool, thanks. Any other questions?
Thank you, Lorenzo. It was a really interesting presentation. I think the approach is really interesting to evaluate what the best option is in any situation rather than just a throw-in. So I was wondering if you thought about if you could use the same framework to decide whether it would be smart to cross a ball or recycle possession, from what distance you should shoot or maybe keep possession, and maybe also how this would relate to evaluating decision-making of players.
Yes, that's a very nice question. So actually, I think we focused on this specific trade-offs for 2 reasons. First of all, because the discussion started from those 2 goals, and also because the time to do the work was quite limited, but I don't see any barrier to developing this towards something that is more general, either for situations that are of interest for a specific coaching team or a specific analysis, or something more general to evaluate decision-making. I agree. And I don't see, I mean, the simulation itself is pretty simple, so if you have the data, you can really adapt it to other scenarios. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, sort of, when it comes to using that in practice, how realistic would you say it is? Because you would imagine, how realistic is it to be able to say that booting it forward is an option? Because I would imagine a lot of backward passes come when a player's under pressure.
Yes, so again, that's a very interesting question, and I think I would have liked to expand this a little bit with filters on the specific situation that we consider. So right now, the only filter that we applied was, let's only keep the backward passes, because there was a kind of a light assumption that if an easy pass forward is available, then a player should probably select that and will probably select that. And so instead we tried to model this conservative approach of a team by just selecting a backward pass. I think it would make sense to apply some more filtering, especially if you want to analyze certain kinds of situations. So for example, only passes where the player is under pressure, for example. But I think that's pretty easy to add to this. So if you add an additional filter on the data that you use for this kind of tool, then that's pretty straightforward to do, and maybe the results would change a little bit, but from a technical perspective, I don't think that would change a lot.
Mm-hmm. And is it like assumed if a player is, say, aiming to reach that end zone, is it assumed they hit that with 100% accuracy, or? That's
another thing that I think would be interesting to work on to expand this. So we worked with the simulation approach to. Actually, when we started working on this, we assumed, well, for a football player, for a soccer player, it's easy to just put the ball there. But of course, if you are just outside of your box, it's not exactly that easy to put the ball right close to the corner on the opposite side of the pitch. So you could use some kind of machine learning model to also do this part of the simulation. What we did was adopting a simple approach for mainly for time constraints of sampling the length of these clearances from the training data distributions. But I think here would be like adding a little step here. So when you are simulating the clearance itself, you could also plug in a model that simulates this clearance in a better way, probably, and the rest would remain the same. So that would also be a nice addition.
I was wondering if you had a chance to either look at, or if you've got a guess as to whether the result would depend on team strength. So if you're playing against a really good team who's good in possession, would that change the result perhaps?
Yeah, that's also, basically that was our final discussion when I was, like, we were wrapping up the paper and preparing the slides. And then someone started thinking about that. And we said, well, we have no information at this point in the framework, but that would be really nice to add, for example, among the contextual features that we use. Those right now describe only the status of the match, but probably an indication of the opponent would be really important. Even something like a ranking-based indication of how strong the team is would also be cool to insert player-specific information, but that would be maybe a little bit of a stretch. No, to answer, no, that's not there yet, but again, also something nice that I would like to work on and add, because I think that would definitely kind of change some of the results. And also to use it in practice, it would be even more trustworthy because you are keeping track of who you're playing against or who you are. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.